Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here.
Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath, and good to see the Carters and all my friends from the Countryside Sabbath Fellowship that you've seen before. This morning, for the first hour in Sabbath School hour, we studied the emotional problems that people are facing, the anxiety and depression and fear that's gripping our society. And we don't just have platitudes and fine words to offer. We have the Bible to offer and the power of prayer to stabilize us in a time when we're told everything will be turned upside down. And God's people are here to turn things right side up. And so we studied that for a little while in Sabbath school. And then for the worship hour, we studied about the heart and the spiritual heart as well as the physical heart. And as you remember, I mentioned the broken heart syndrome. Who recalls what that's called in Japanese?
You can't pronounce it.
Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, meaning the heart goes flabby and weak. And Takotsubo cardiomyopathy is a medical word that we use in English in medicine, but Takotsubo means the octopus trap. You remember that, don't you? And how the heart, when there's a broken heart, and some of these cords in the left ventricle fracture, that it turns into a kind of a dilated heart that doesn't work good. And the Japanese saw that it looked exactly like their octopus trap, so they called it Takotsubo. Now, someone was asking me in the break whether that can ever heal, or whether you're just stuck with a weak, flabby heart. And far better than the cardiomyopathy that comes from cholesterol, or from a heart attack, or from myocarditis, the broken heart syndrome has been seen to heal itself within 1 month and actually restore normal cardiac output and normal function of the heart. So that's the good news that I didn't mention this morning. And then we looked at the heart and how it fits into the Bible, and how we have, what kind of heart? What do we have that's our natural heart? A wicked heart, a sinful heart, a stony heart, a rebellious heart. And we looked at texts for all of those. That all came out of the Bible. Not a very good picture for human beings living in the end of time. But what do we need? We need a new heart. A new heart, a heart of flesh. Now, I want to start this afternoon by sharing you what happens when we get a heart of flesh. Turn to Romans chapter 15. And most people, when they study the book of Romans, they see it as a book of theology. Maybe hard to understand. People go to seminaries and they study the book of Romans and they pontificate on all their insights. But this is a book on medical missionary work. And Romans 15 verses 1 to 3 give us a commission, our marching orders. Romans 15, 1 to 3. We then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves. You see that? Did you know that was in the book of Romans? We who are strong. Now, everybody here is stronger than someone, because there are some people that couldn't come. Some of them couldn't get out of bed. Some of them couldn't wake up on Sabbath morning. And in our fellowship, I one time saw people sleeping in and missing Sabbath school when it was the best part of the worship service, the time of study of God's Word. I got up my holy boldness and I offered anyone a free alarm clock who needed one to wake up at 8 o'clock on Sabbath morning. Well,
this morning I woke up at 5 o'clock. And I had my alarm set for 6 because we had to leave at a certain time to get here, out of the mountains where the Letchers live. And so I wanted to be on time, and I was all packed up and ready to go, and my bed stripped and the dishes done. And I'd leave it for my sister here. She doesn't need any more work than she has to do. But, Jesus, when he left the grave, he folded even his grave clothes and folded them all up and put them neat in. And Ellen White mentions that in the book Desire of Ages. And so it shows that we're to leave order behind us. Order is heaven's first law. It says in Counsels on Health, page 101. So it says here, we that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak. Now Job, he did that. He said, I was eyes to the blind, and feet was I to the lame. Now, if you're eyes to the blind, you help them walk, don't you? And who holds on to who when you're helping a blind man walk? Come up here. Let me illustrate this. So if I'm blind, you give me your arm, and I take hold of your arm, and that gives me the assurance that you're there, and I'm holding. You don't take my hand and drag me, you see, and pull me along. Thank you very much, Al. That's how you help a blind person to walk. You let them take hold of you so that they stay secure in what they're doing. And feet to the lame, that means you run errands for people that can't go where they want to go. But it says we're to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves. There are some people who are getting weak-minded and they can't remember. So when you're helping someone by running errands for them, it might be a neighbor that's infirm or someone else that's sick. But it says here, let every one of us please his neighbor. We had a neighbor who was dying of lung cancer. We offered him for years that he could come to our house, he could take steam baths. He needed to quit smoking, and we gave him literature, we pled with him. He continued to smoke till he had lung cancer and finally needed oxygen. Then he quit smoking. That's not a good time to quit smoking. But I went up for several months and cleaned out the filters for his watering system and ran errands for him and brought him things. And we ministered to our neighbor as he was going down, prayed with him many times. Then his family have turned to be our enemies, and we can't please them. So, that's pretty sad. But you can't please everybody, can you? And you can please some of the people some of the time, but not all the people all the time. You've heard that saying. So it says, let every one of us please his neighbor for his good. Do what you can. Some people take a loaf of bread. Some people take a glass of water. It says in the Gospels, you will not lose your reward. We used to take a loaf of bread. When I lived at Loma Linda, the next door neighbor was an alcoholic. And every once in a while, we'd fix a loaf of bread and take it over to him. He'd call it cake. It was like, a loaf of fresh bread tastes really good. And what he was drinking made everything taste better, I think. But it helped him and kind of helped him have a little better chemistry in his brain. So it says here in verse 3, for even Christ pleased not himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of them that reproached thee fell on me. So we're even to take some of the flack that other people might be getting and be gracious about it. Do you understand? We're in the end time. And a lot of things that Seventh-day Adventists do will be misunderstood, will be misrepresented. We're told that when we reach the standard God would have us reach, the world will regard us as odd, singular, straight-laced extremists. Now, who wants to be given that moniker or title? We try to be ordinary people. We want to be good, thought of well. But even Christ pleased not himself. You see, friends, and I'm just getting warmed up this afternoon with these thoughts. Our reputation is what people think about us. Our character is what we really are. Which of the two will we take to heaven? Our character. What you really are is what you take to heaven. What people think about you is like the weather. It may change, like it does here in eastern Washington. One moment it's sprinkling, another time it's raining, and then the sun comes out. And your reputation may be like that. As much as you try to live a godly life and do good to others. But that's going to change. Because as we get nearer the end, what will the world think about Seventh-day Adventists? Sabbath keepers? Nonconformists? That's just the minor criticism. People that are out of sync with reality, going crazy. In Russia, some of them were put in mental hospitals and given shock treatments and drugs to try and straighten them out. There are stories about this, how God preserved their minds from even the influence of the drugs so that they maintained their hold on Jesus. But we are not guaranteed an easy road in the end of time. Now, what I want to go back to here, let me finish this thought for a couple of more verses. For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. See, all the Old Testament was written for God's people in the end of time. Our evangelical friends have made a big mistake by relegating the Old Testament to the old dispensation and saying we're just New Testament Christians. We are Bible Christians. And the Old Testament is just as important. That's where God introduced creation and the flood and the judgments on an evil world. And then the Exodus and how God gets his people out of bondage onto the promised land. And then the Ten Commandments and the sanctuary and all of that. We wouldn't be what we are as Seventh-day Adventists if it weren't for the Old Testament. And neither would we have the assurance that Jesus is who he said he was if we didn't have the Old Testament to validate it. And on the road to Emmaus, Christ taught the Old Testament and showed that he was indeed the Messiah. So this is written for our learning. And Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, he says they are also written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So admonition is a little stronger than learning, isn't it? That's, I want to teach you something. Admonition is, I want to straighten you out. And God's people need straightening out today. We all need it. And our leaders need help in that. And our whole church does. And then it says here, verse 5, now the God of patience and consolation grant you to be like-minded one toward another according to Christ Jesus. Like-minded. That's not just unity, that's the comfort that it comes in fellowship with fellow believers. When I was a little boy, I was in the backyard. We had a chain link fence around the backyard, about 3 feet high, just enough to keep me in and keep our dog in. And we could hit a baseball, and we couldn't hit it very far, and rarely did it go over the fence. And I was looking over the fence one day at the next door neighbor, and a mama and a little boy came out, and she had the little boy by his arm, and he was wanting to stay in the house, and she was wanting him to come outside because she had a lesson to teach him. She bent him over her knee, and I heard, and he was crying, and I was watching through the chain link fence to see what was going on. And this was back in the days when it was considered approved and good if a parent disciplined the children. I had no idea what he'd done, but he was getting it. But then as soon as she was done, he reached around and grabbed her legs and buried his face in her apron, and she hugged him really close. And I still remember that to this day, that her discipline was obviously mingled with love. Because as soon as it was done, he loved his mama and she loved him and she comforted him. And you know, we're told that whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth and even scourgeth a son. And of course, Jesus took the worst scourge for us. So, the God of patience and consolation. Now back up to chapter 12, still in the book of Romans. And it says here, I beseech you. Beseech is more of an older word, but it means I plead with you. I beg of you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a what? A living sacrifice. So that's the title of our afternoon, present your body. A living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Now, God is interested in our commitment, but it says in 1 Corinthians 13, though I give my body to be burned, now that's called martyrdom, or the ultimate sacrifice. But if you have not love or charity, it's what? Profits nothing. So it's not worth anything unless it's a loving gift. So this is different than a burning sacrifice. This is a living sacrifice. And that's the way we are to present ourselves. That means the health message is very important and part of the gospel for this time. Do you understand? This is not just a recommendation. This is a mandate from heaven that we are to try to live as healthy in our bodies as we possibly can. And that's not eating your way into heaven. Now, Adam and Eve, they ate their way out of the garden, but they couldn't eat enough tofu to get back in. And you can't get your way into heaven with gluten sandwiches and tofu burgers. Or apples and oranges and bananas. No, we don't eat our way into heaven. We eat to the glory of God. And we drink to the glory of God. And whatever we do, we're to do to the glory of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31 tells us that. And so that's the living sacrifice. Now, one of my favorite teachers at Loma Linda was Ellsworth Wareham, a heart surgeon, an excellent heart surgeon. He was the head of the Loma Linda heart team that went to countries such as Saudi Arabia and Vietnam and China and many other countries of the world, teaching the doctors in those areas how to do intricate open heart operations and congenital heart disease and save lives. And he taught that in many parts of the world. And he just died not too long ago at about 105 or 106 years of age. And he was part of what they call the Blue Zone in Loma Linda, which is one of about 4 areas of the world where they have the highest percentage of people that live over 100 years of age. And I looked on the internet to see what his testimony was as his lifestyle. He was a complete vegetarian long before hardly any of the other professors at Loma Linda had adopted the vegetarian diet. He liked to work in his garden. He went for a walk every day. And he was the most congenial person. You could not get him angry or get him upset or get him on a political thing at all. He had what Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes called equanimity. He wrote a book about that called Equanimitas. And that means he was even-tempered and cheerful and encouraging to his students. And I still remember that. And you can read about that or see it on the internet. Another heart surgeon, my classmate Len Bailey, who did infant heart transplants, about 70 of them, children that would have died otherwise if he hadn't learned how to do that. He passed away in May of this year, and of cancer, and I got to see him in March and give him a hug and shake his hand and thank him for what he'd done, because he was, of our class, the most famous of all the classmates. And when he passed away, I read the obituary in the New York Times telling about his life. There was like a half a page of his life and what he had done, and growing up on a farm, milking cows and different things like that, and then going to medical school and having the dream of saving the lives of little children. And it mentioned, even in the New York Times, what a humble man he was. With all of that recognition and all of those honors, he stayed humble. And even with the opposition from the media for what he was doing at first, he remained humble and was a great credit to Seventh-day Adventists as a result of his attitude as well as his abilities. So God wants us to make a contribution and to present our bodies a living sacrifice. And then it says in verse 2, and be not conformed to this world. Not conformed to what? The world. Oh, I thought the world was good. The evolutionists tell us it's getting better all the time. Billy Graham didn't think so. He said near the close of his life that I've been a failure. And they said, Pastor Graham, how can you say your work is a failure? You preached to more than 100 million people and brought them to Christ. He said, because the world's gotten worse on my watch. He was a humble man too. One of the very few popular mega church evangelists who never had an affair, who never had a slanderous thing said about him. I mean, this is remarkable. Of course, Seventh-day Adventists have a few people like that too. And so this idea of being not conformed to the world is the negative part. And if we're not to be conformed to the world, we shouldn't spend very much time watching what the world does. Because if you spend very much time on television, reality shows, soap operas, sports, inevitably you'll be conformed to what you spend your time looking at. Isn't that right? And most of the advertising is designed to put us in debt and to buy something we don't need. There was a farm boy from upstate New York. One time he visited the city of New York and walked down the streets of Fifth Avenue and looked in the department stores. And when he came back, you know what he told his dad? He said, I've never seen so many things I didn't need before. So the Lord wants us to turn away from the things of the world. I don't mean you can't buy some tools and some instruments and some books and things like that, but the things of the world. And then it says, be ye transformed. This is the other side of the coin. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that word transformed in the Greek is metamorpho, which comes from the same root as metamorphosis, which reminds you of what? A butterfly or a moth. Here they are crawling around as a worm, eating plants. And then all of a sudden comes the day when this little creature stops what it's doing and attaches itself to a twig and starts to wrap itself up tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, and finds it's immobilized so it can't even wiggle. And you know what happens to it? They've actually found that they go liquid in there. They turn into just a liquid and stay in there for a few weeks or sometimes over the winter. And then comes the day when it starts to wiggle again and it starts to split and the outer part comes off, and then it's stretching out its wings and its antennas and legs and flies off. Totally transformed. Something so different from what it was. And did you know there isn't a biologist in the world that can explain that? They can't figure that out. Doesn't fit Darwin. And so Here is a marvelous thing, and this is the same root word, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And what you can have when you were born with a carnal mind, you can have the mind of Christ. And the mind of Christ is a heavenly mind, a godly mind, one who is always looking for somebody to help, pleasing others instead of yourself, because it says Christ pleased not himself. And so that's so different from the way I was and am. I got a lot of the stuff in me that needs to be changed. Every day I'm more and more pleading with God during the night that he'll make me like Jesus. Amen. I used to have 5 ambitions in life. They weren't mutually exclusive. They were things that I had interest and talent in and wanted to do. One of them was to be a good physician. One was to be a good pastor. One was to be a good husband. One was to be a good prepper out in the country living and gardening. And the fifth was to be a good pilot. And those were my 5 goals. Through various circumstances, the Lord has narrowed the field, and now I have one goal. I want to be like Jesus. Now, it doesn't knock all the others out, totally, but Paul said, this one thing I do, forgetting those things that are behind. Now, that doesn't mean I wanted to hit a home run in Yankee Stadium, and I wanted to be a millionaire and win the lottery. None of these were totally selfish goals, but now I really want to be like Christ. And I commend that goal to you. Like Paul says, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. So it says we can renew our mind and then prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now, another thing that the Lord has been teaching me lately as I've prayed for the Holy Spirit is the fruit of the Spirit. And in Galatians 5, verse 22 and 23, it says, but the fruit of the Spirit is, and do you notice it's a singular word? It's fruit, it's not fruits. With gifts, some get this gift and some get that gift. Some have the gift of teaching, some have the gift of music, some have the gift of organization, some have the gift of helping people and serving others. You see, we all have different gifts. But when God gives his Holy Spirit, he gives the fruit. And the fruit comes as a package. You get it all. You don't get just a little bit of love, but no peace. And I said, Lord, you are wonderful. You are not only going to give me love in my heart, but you're going to give me the whole package too. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. It all comes. So God's people, once the Holy Spirit comes upon us and gives us the latter rain, you're going to have it all. And that means when you get opposition, you still have peace. Because happiness, another word for it, is not what's around us, it's what's within us. It's not what we have, but what we are. And so I'm going to spend a little time this afternoon on the subject of temperance, because that, although it's the last one, it's included in this. And I think that God's people today are really weak in terms of our temperance message. 1, there's a tendency to overwork. 2, there's a tendency to overeat. 3, there's a tendency to talk too much. There's too much gossiping going on around us among God's people. And to run the risk of hurting somebody else by the things that we say or don't say when we should speak up or keep silent. And we are, as we get nearer the coming crisis, we're to protect one another every way we can. Like, and don't misunderstand me, like Rahab protected the spies when they came to her. Did she protect them? Did God bless her for that? Some people have been really hard on Rahab, thinking she lied. I believe she followed a higher law. A higher law. And the law was to protect God's people, even at the risk of your own freedom or your own life. And Rahab was honored by God, and God said, you just drop that little red cord out there, and when we shout and the angels shake the walls to pieces, you're going to be safe if you're in that house. And was she? Her whole family was preserved. And Rahab goes down as one of 4 foreign females that were in the lineage of Christ, along with Tamar and Rahab and Ruth, and who was the fourth? I've forgotten. But this is a wonderful thing that God has for us, is when He gives us love, He gives us peace. And He gives us joy. And joy that God gives, nobody can take away from you. So that even if you are persecuted for righteousness' sake, as Matthew 5 says, it says, blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. And then what's the next verse say? Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Now that isn't popular psychology. Because most people, when they are persecuted, they get angry or bitter or resentful. And too many of God's people still have that carnal spirit in them, so that they can't bear opposition or criticism. And they may cave in and make the wrong decision. Even leaders in government and leaders in churches cannot stand the pressure. And they said, if you can't stand the heat, you should get out of the kitchen. That's right. So, there's a price of leadership in God's cause. It's a lonely road, actually. But be of good courage, those of you who are leaders in God's work. You have joy that others do not have, and peace and gentleness and faith. Now let's look at temperance a minute. I'm going to put something on the screen here and pull that up. And I want to expand on presenting your body a living sacrifice. So can you pay attention to that for just a few minutes? So we're going to look at one aspect of Christian temperance. There's a book that is putting many of Ellen White's articles called Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene, one of those old, more original books. But we're going to look at a current issue that is affecting Adventist people, at least in our area, maybe around here too, because in recent years, the laws have been changed by the legislature, making something legal that was absolutely illegal for decades. And you know what I'm talking about, and that's marijuana. It was considered a felony to use or grow or possess, and now you see them growing at many different places. So this principle of temperance, true temperance, according to Ellen White, teaches us to dispense with all things harmful and to use in moderation all things healthful. Now, salt is not harmful, but do you need to be moderate in your use of salt? Okay. There's other things. Honey is not harmful, but should you be moderate in your use of honey? The Bible says, eat honey, for it is good, and it's sweet to the taste. But then in the next chapter in book of Proverbs, it said it is not good to eat much honey. So there's a balance right in one book of the Bible by the same author, Solomon. So to dispense with all things harmful. Now, is tobacco harmful? It is harmful. And even in Ellen White's day, she knew that the doctors of her day were recommending smoking for lung diseases. If you had a chronic cough, if you had catarrh they called it then, what we call like drainage and sinus congestion, the medical thinking of that time in the 1880s was to get a pipe and fill it with tobacco and puff on that pipe and inhale it and hold it in deeply into your lungs. And it was the first inhaler. And what it was Ellen White showing in about 1870, tobacco is a slow, insidious, but most malignant poison. So what she wrote was totally against the established thinking of that time. And who was right? She was right. It took till late 1950s, about 58, when doctors Hammond and Horn showed that the damage to the lungs from tobacco smoking, first on dogs. They did a tracheostomy on the dogs, and they hooked them up to a smoking machine. Nowadays, the animal rights people would never let them get away with that kind of thing. These poor little beagle dogs, the first time they were hooked up and involuntarily inhaled tobacco smoke into their windpipe, they held their breath and some of them passed out. And within about 3 to 5 days, they were wagging their tails when it was time to go into the machine. They were already addicted to tobacco. And over a period of 6 months, they inhaled so much tobacco that they showed in the autopsies of the animals that they had emphysema changes and black tarry lungs and were actually getting precursor cells to cancer. And so they were given a Nobel Prize for their discovery that tobacco and lung cancer are interrelated, leading to the Surgeon General in 1962 to write it up as government policy. And so it remains. It is a harmful substance. So Adventists who are told we should be the head and not the tail, we developed back then in the 1950s and early 60s a program to help people quit smoking. And do you know what it was called? The 5-day plan. I had a part in it. As a young medical student, I asked my professor, it was a cardiology rotation at March Air Force Base. I said, I have the opportunity to go to Winnemucca, Nevada, and work with a pastor friend of mine and help people stop smoking. And this man, who was not a Seventh-day Adventist, a heart specialist there at March Air Force Base in Southern California, he said, I'll give you a week off. You go there and learn everything you can about how to help people quit smoking, and you'll do more good than spending 1 week here on our wards seeing patients and following us around. And I thank the Lord for that privilege, because if I'd been at Loma Linda, I know they wouldn't have given me a week off to do that. But he gave me that week off, and I worked with Pastor Steve McCarty, who I'd colportered with in the state of Utah, and we were good friends, and we helped, I don't know how many people, not any large number, but we learned enough that we could do that kind of public program almost with our eyes closed. We could, we mastered the subject in our lectures, and years later I had the privilege of doing it with Mark Finley at Wildwood when he was there, and with others through the years. And then we came up with Psychology 101 and merged it in with the 5-day plan, and it went down and didn't do near as much good as when we invited them to stay after for prayer, because we had a spiritual component to it that made sure that they were going to God for the victory. So this temperance movement was very important, and with the help of temperance leaders like Elder Savelle and the father of the religious liberty man, what was his name? It'll come to me in just a moment. Sorry, that's a senior thing that we have once in a while. Steed, E.H.J. Steed, Ernie Steed. These were mighty people in our temperance movement that were going to Muslim countries. And because we would help them stop smoking and we didn't eat pork, they would let us do programs. And we could talk about God much more freely in that era than we can today with them. Now we see some people that are trying to reach the Muslims by saying we all pray to the same God and that all is the same God as our God. And I question whether that's really the case. From what I've read, it doesn't seem that way. And I want them to get to know Jesus, who the Islamic people reject as maybe he's a good man, but he's not God in human flesh and the Savior. But that's a little off the subject, but you understand that the health message is an entering wedge. It's given to us by God to get in where otherwise we wouldn't go. And that's just a wonderful thing. So the temperance is very important. Now, let me look at something that you won't find in the Spirit of Prophecy. Ellen White talked about narcotics, and this is as close as you could get to a narcotic or dangerous drug. But part of the problem with marijuana today is they're thinking they can make a huge amount of money with it. And wanting to sell stocks in the companies and all of that. In Oregon, it was interesting. I saw field after field growing marijuana. Now they have to put a big fence around it. So now they're growing hemp because they're selling that. And I'm going to come to that in a little bit because I want to share some information about that. But just as they were about to harvest it, and it smells the same, looks almost the same, it smells like skunk. They call it skunk weed, and your whole valley and your whole field smells like a skunk. You know, when you drive along and you accidentally run over a skunk, you roll the windows down and you want that smell out of your car as quickly as possible. But what happened this year is that the torrential rains came just as the harvest was coming, and it ruined about more than 3/4 of the crop. And I couldn't help but smile a little bit because I think it's a blight on the farms to take out their hay fields and to take out their cornfields and take out their beans and take out the edible vegetables and plow up their orchards and just plant supposedly a cash crop. That it's not good agricultural foresight to put all your eggs in one basket, as they say. So there's social aspects. There's the claim that you can get all your aches and pains taken away, and the medicinal, and then there's the health risk and the fact that we're altering the minds of young people and older ones. And how long can we go on as a society with an altered mind? If you take the young people in the grade schools and you introduce marijuana to them, and some of them are smoking it, just like in a previous age, children were picking up tobacco at age 8. I've met people that started smoking when they were 8 years old. And they're taking up marijuana now at an early age because it's a cool thing to do. And in teenage years, it's a more entrenched habit that becomes very part of their social life. And then what happens to their ambition? It goes. And many of them don't graduate. Their grades go down from B's and C's to D's and F's. And marijuana affects the mind, the memory, the personality, the judgment, driving skills, ambition, education, family, the immune system, longevity, spirituality, and much more. And so there isn't anything that I could say to recommend it for anybody. Now, what I'm amazed at is that our Seventh-day Adventist leaders of the health movement aren't saying anything. You don't even see articles in the Review on this. You see about maybe what you ought to do for allergies or the common cold or some other relatively trivial thing, but not the major public health danger to young people today. And I'm going to go into this a little more. I have an article in my bag. Let me show it to you. Could you just pull out that folder that has tabs on the end for me? It's right on the front there. It's a file folder. That's what I want. Thank you very much. This just came across my desk the other day. Pain Medicine News. And it says, medical cannabis found safe and effective for treating fibromyalgia. Well, that sounds great, doesn't it? Aches and pains in your muscles, found safe and effective, but it doesn't say anything about what it does to your brain. You know, you have to say, well, what is the side effects? What are the risks? Not just what are the benefits. And so I looked at that. I said, I got to write to these people. And I plan to. Found safe and effective. That is a very biased article. And so what is happening is that while they say it's safe, they haven't given the full story. If you do not do full disclosure when you're selling a house, and you say, but this house, the basement floods, the roof leaks, the termites are eating up the outer structure, and we've got dry rot everywhere, and you do not do full disclosure and you sell the house as a turnkey operation, but there's thousands of dollars of repair, do you know what happens down the line? You end up in court. Somebody's going to sue you and say, you did not tell me. Now, there is a saying, let the buyer beware. But when it comes to health considerations, if you are given a drug and they're not telling you that your hair is going to fall out, then once you go bald, you have a case, don't you? Or here, this is going to help your cancer, but your teeth are all going to fall out, and you'll lose your eyesight, and your heart might quit, but it'll kill every cancer cell in your body. You see, there has to be full disclosure here, and that's not happening in this new era that we're in. And the second thing is, driving under the influence of marijuana is absolutely illegal, just as drinking and driving is. And everyone knows that there are certain legal limits for alcohol and driving a car. I have a friend, a business acquaintance, and I've tried my best to help him quit drinking. And he quit for quite a while he was coming twice a week, and we were studying the Bible and praying together. And then his wife got nervous about that, and she encouraged him to quit coming for his Bible class and his prayer time with his doctor and his wife. And it was because his pastor, a woman pastor in a nearby Sunday church, got nervous that we were trying to steal a sheep from her flock. And he was one of her principal supporters. And so she encouraged him to quit, and he went back to drinking. Plus his wife worked in a winery, in the taste testing room of the winery. And we pled with her, if you want your husband to quit drinking, please change your job and quit working at a winery and bringing the wine bottles home and putting them around in the house. And she liked her job and she liked the income and she wouldn't do it. So who's to blame? Is it just his fault that he's relapsed? And so I said to him, you know, my friend, in fact, one Saturday night, he called and he was obviously a little tipsy in his talk on the phone. And I said, I got to go see him. And I knocked on his door at 9:30 in the evening. And he looked, and here I was standing there at his home. Oh, Doc, come on in. I'm a little embarrassed, but... And I said, I come to pray with you, and we want to get you into a treatment program. And I'm on your side, you know. And so he invited me in. We're good enough friends that we could do that. And he wouldn't slam the door or resist. So time went on, and I said, you know, if you don't quit drinking the easy way, you're going to have to quit the hard way. And one day he left the restaurant where they have the bar, and the sheriff followed him in his car. And pretty soon the lights went on. And now, for 2 years, he had to blow in a balloon and suck on it and cough into it, and then wait 10 minutes until the computer did its thing and sent word to the sheriff's department before his vehicle would start. And he found that quite a pain, and for the first year he was angry with the sheriffs for pulling him in like that and putting the breathalyzer on his vehicle. But you know what? God had a lesson. The second year he was thankful it had happened, because it had taught him something, that this is not good. We didn't want him to kill anybody on the highway by drunk driving. You know, it can happen. So it's considered illegal, and the same is true for marijuana. In fact, the police now in all the states are developing the technology to test somebody on the side of the road, just like they do for alcohol. Now, in alcohol, it's not just walk a straight line like this. It's either blowing in a balloon or doing a urine test, and if you refuse the test, then you're considered guilty. You understand that. And so they're actually very close to having similar tests that they can do on the spot when they see somebody driving erratically. And now there's clues to it, not just a hiccup or walking unsteadily, but there's some things I'll show you. Now, marijuana is also considered a gateway drug to other drugs. And most people that have gotten into heroin or methamphetamines and are shooting up the harder, stronger addicting drugs started by smoking pot. And so it's truly a gateway drug, as is tobacco and beer. And so the thing that it really happens to young people is it destroys their motivation. It's called amotivational. And it's not just to graduating from high school, but it's holding a job or getting out of bed in the morning. I've known people that their parents call and they say, we can't get them out of bed. But they're smoking pot. And much to the dismay of Christian parents. THC, which is the active ingredient called tetrahydrocannabinol, inhibits the brain from developing new memories or learning new things. So that's a big danger for the THC that's found in marijuana. And it's often used with alcohol and other drugs, which increases the risk of crime greatly, including violence and sexual violence. And it's often fueled by a combination of drugs like this. Now, there's different forms of it. In marijuana, they're smoking it, as you know, cigarettes and cigars and pipes. And one of the big dangers now is called vaping, which takes these electronic cigarettes that have a little battery in them that vaporizes the smoke. And they're using it too with tobacco. That's the companies build it for tobacco. but they can put all kinds of substances in it. Just a drop of this, a drop of that. They're experimenting with different drugs. And have you read in recent weeks how people have died in states all over the country from vaping? In fact, it's inhaling the vapors is what it's called. And they're using marijuana and sometimes putting a little bit of that in with tobacco. And you get the chemical effects without so much of the harsh smoke. So we're not going to see the same cancer. We're just going to see them die, which I think is worse. And so there is a movement now to ban these substances, not just on airplanes where they won't let you smoke an e-cigarette, they're called, electronic cigarette. And so then they're putting it in other things, edibles, they call them, like beverages. In Western Washington, they stocked a store, marijuana store, with soda pop that had marijuana in it. And people would never have heard about it except the company that made it overcarbonated the beverage. And when they picked it up off the shelf, it exploded and glass flew everywhere. And it was a mess, and people got cut with the flying glass, and they had to reclaim all their product and not put so much carbon dioxide in it. But sodas, candies, cookies, butter, honey sticks, cooking oils. Can you imagine? There's never been an addicting, habit-forming substance that's been put in so many different things as marijuana. Never have they done all that with heroin. They've never done that with tobacco. To have it in so many things. A pilot friend of mine went to a neighborhood gathering, and he picked up a cookie off the cookie table where they had the neighbors had contributed, kind of a potluck luncheon, and pretty soon his heart was pounding, his chest was hurting, he thought he was having a heart attack, and he went to the nearest emergency room, and the doctors checked him all over, and he said, "You haven't had a heart attack," and then they sent him to the bathroom for a urine sample, and he came back, he said, "Oh, you'll be glad to know that it was just marijuana in that cookie that you ate."
Do they have the list that is in the product?
You won't see it on labels. These are not like ingredient lists. That's the problem. And so this man happened to be a helicopter pilot for Weyerhaeuser industry. And as a helicopter pilot, he's basically grounded, just like that, and in danger of losing his job, which is his livelihood as chief pilot for the helicopters that go around spraying and putting out fires and doing all the things that aerial surveillance and service does for that company. And so he called me on the phone. He said, "Doc, I've got a problem. I just accidentally ate this thing, and it was on the table with all the other cookies, and there was no indication that this was from a neighbor that had contributed." And he was really angry with them. And they said, "Well, people are going to eat what they want to eat." And so they weren't taking responsibility. And I had to write it up for the FAA and for his company and the personnel. And I said he had accidental poisoning. And I wrote it up as that and got him his job back. So it was really interesting. And he's grateful to this day for what I did working with him and waiting 2 weeks to make sure he had a sample that was free of any drug residues. But you see, it's getting in all kinds of stuff. And the dose of it is very imprecise. So it's not like, that in a baby aspirin there's 81 milligrams of aspirin. This dose is, who knows how much it is or how little it is. Plus, I'll show you what's happening to the marijuana today, which is even making it worse. But it's in topical things too, like oils, lotions, and creams. People are rubbing it on and claiming that it helps them feel better. And then, of course, for a long time, it's been in hashish, which they smoke in a big canister And and I saw that in Egypt when I was walking down one of the back streets in Cairo one night, and years ago. And here's a man, his eyes are going like this, and he's barely able to sit up straight, and he's glassed over, and he's got this long hose coming out of a can, and it's smoking, and he's puffing away. And I thought, what in the world is that man doing? And then I found out, because I was kind of naive growing up in a Christian home, in an organization. Poor man, poor man. So the hazards, here's one of the biggest ones, is psychosis. There are people losing their minds and becoming angry, violent, vicious, verbally and physically, with paranoid and schizophrenia, some of the most dangerous mental illnesses. And I have a friend who works in the mental health department in Eugene, in what we call the Johnson unit, where it's a locked mental unit of the hospital. And she did a survey of the patients there, and every one of them had used marijuana. So it's not the cause, but it's a common contributor toward unhinging the brain. And it may create a safety risk in the workplace, especially where there's machinery operating, forklifts and dozers and things like that, or driving. And a motivational loss of ambition, I mentioned that. Impaired short-term memory from developing new memories, or even enhancing false memories. Now, if you get false memories, what's going to come out of your mouth? Lies, that's right. Lies. If you have false memories, you're going to tell lies. You may think you remember something somebody did, which they never did. It may destroy a family relationship. It may destroy a marriage. False memories are something God wants to preserve us from. And He can't do it completely unless we avoid these substances. And then there's a developmental risk. They studied this at the University of Seattle, even funded by the government, amazingly, and they found there's 5 times the risk of premature births in mothers that smoke marijuana. And that's serious because it increases the risk for a child. Now, I mentioned the variable dosage. Are you still interested in this? Is this important to you? In the 1960s, cannabis products contained from 1 to 5% THC by weight. Today, cannabis products contain as much as 15 to 25% THC by weight, or even 30% or more. So they have created new strains by biologic transformation of the plant to grow the plant with higher and higher amounts of this bioactive substance. Now that, to me, is a red flag, because that means what they thought that was safe before, that same puff may be almost lethal. 2 people can smoke the same amount and be exposed to different doses, not only because of the way they smoke it, but the way they inhale and the amount that they hold into their system. The delivery method affects the dose, and one of the worst new kinds is that e-cigarette that concentrates the active chemical, and that is a serious problem. And then there is the second cousin, the same cannabis sativa, same biology, called hemp, a plant that they grow from seed, can get up to 15 or 20 feet tall, and its seeds are pressed for oil and used in food, fuel, paints, and different things. And the fiber, going back a long ways, has been used in fabrics, paper, plastics, rope, building materials, wallpaper, barn bedding. I have no problem in their putting it into barn bedding for your sheep to lie down on, or for your chickens to scratch in. And to make a rope out of hemp, I have no problem with that, because that was used 125 years ago. 70 to 90% of the rope was hemp rope. That makes real strong ropes. They were used in ships to hold ships to the wharf, and many other uses. Twine, cordage, sails, canvas, fiber, and so forth was made from hemp. But now, since 1938 or so, when DuPont came up with nylon, they rapidly replaced the hemp industry with nylon and now other synthetic fibers. So most rope is not required from this source. So that's the protection. Now, here is the problem. This drug, CBD, cannabidiol, is just one of over 125 terpenes and 80 cannabinoids found in the cannabis plant. So it's a combination, it's a big chemical zoo of chemistry. And all these cannabinoids of the 80 are 21 carbon molecules that block or stimulate brain receptors. So all the different plants have different ratios of these, and they can block or affect your brain receptors. And they also, this is recent research, they interfere with an enzyme in the liver called cytochrome P450. This is an enzyme that metabolizes all kinds of drugs that you might take, even over-the-counter medications. And a family of liver enzymes that are interfered with by CBD. So this is not an entirely safe substance. And the CBD may not cause euphoria like THC does. Euphoria means you feel like you can whip the world, like $1 million. But all hemp contains some trace amounts of THC. And this is not told to you in the stores that have the green and orange signs out front. It contains from 0.5% to 2%, whereas marijuana itself, the THC, would be in the range of 8 to 15%. So to me, it functions like Sanka coffee. It's not caffeine free. It's lower caffeine, but it still can be addictive and it can be a little bit stimulating. And this fact that there's always a blend of THC, and what were you telling me from your policeman friend, Al? Just speak up so we can record this.
He just called me yesterday, as a matter of fact, left a message and said that he was certified in testing. And his friend at the police lab told him that CBD has THC in it, unlike the advertisers say it doesn't. And he said if you test it, it'll test positive. And sure enough, he tested it, 2 different tests, and he tested positive for THC on the CBD.
On people that had used like the oils on them, just rubbing the CBD oils. So I don't encourage our people to use any of these products. I just don't think it's safe to do so. And I don't want you to become amotivational in the end of Earth's history at a time when we need to be arise, shine, for thy light has come and the glory of God is on you, and end up being part of those that will give the loud cry. So that is my story. There are addictions. They say it's not addicting, but it's most commonly addicting in young people, and 55% of those going to rehab programs are under 25 years of age. And there's a great rehab program called Narcanon, and it's a national, has drug recovery centers around the world, helps people to recover from marijuana addiction. So why would they have these all over the world if it was non-addicting? And the fact is that most of them are young people. So this is a very serious thing. I went to our town in Cresswell, and they were debating whether to open a marijuana store in town because there's the tax revenues and the other things they were promising. In fact, the business that was wanting to open a marijuana store offered to even donate $100,000 to hire an additional policeman, as if we want in our town the police to be owned by the marijuana salespeople. And so they were offering quite a bit to the town, and I read about it in our little town newspaper, and I said, I've got to go there and speak. It's the first time that I've gone to our town in 19 years to speak at a public meeting. Not that I'm unwilling to do so, I just didn't see anything interesting enough to show up for. And so I prepared a handout. They presented the other side of the story for about 45 minutes, and they said, now if anybody wants to speak against this, you have 2 minutes. I thought, that doesn't sound fair. But I took my 2 minutes, and then I said, now if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. And they asked me questions for several more minutes. And do you know that the town councilors voted not to do it? And then they took it to the populace for a vote, and they voted it down. And then that group wasn't going to give up that easily, so 2 years later, it came up at the last election, and this time 20 businesses banded together to oppose marijuana in the town. And it's the only time in our town's history that 20 businesses have ever agreed about anything. I mean, restaurants, gas stations, tire stores, grocery stores, you know, all hair salons. 20 of them signed on and funded a handbill that they passed out to everybody in town, and 70% were against it. So we're one of the only towns in Oregon that has no marijuana stores. It doesn't mean people don't smoke it in their house or in their backyard, but I thank the Lord that the temperance message gives us a place to speak up. And I want to encourage you to overcome any reticence to do that. So damage, I've got to go through this fairly fast here. Immediate effects, and this is what the policemen look like when they pull somebody over. Their eyes are red. The conjunctiva of the eyes have flushed and turned red. They get increased appetite. They get a dry mouth, tachycardia. Their heart is going fast. Not because they're pulled over by the cop, but it's going fast from the drug. That's the immediate effects of smoking a marijuana cigarette, or what they call a joint. Long-term effects, irritability, anger, or aggression. And I've seen that in a friend of mine who began smoking pot, became angry and aggressive and almost to the point of bullying and being threatening. Nervousness or anxiety, sleep difficulty, including disturbing dreams, a decreased appetite, weight loss, restlessness, and depression. Now that's pretty much something you'd like to avoid. And so all of that are long-term effects. Physical symptoms that cause distress. This again from the use of marijuana, even up to a week or so. Abdominal pain, shakiness, sweating, fever, chills, headache. Uncomfortable symptoms. Why would anybody want to do that? To make themselves sick. I cannot understand why. So, if you're willing, write articles, speak in public, talk to people, neighbors and friends, study the subject to know what you're talking about, and work with those that are seeking victory. And do you think your reward will be in heaven? You may save some and pull them out of the fire, as it were, and hate even the burning of the flesh. So may the Lord bless you and help you to do that. And with that little temperance talk this afternoon, to give you some ammunition for what you need to do in helping others, is there any questions that you'd have? And I think we'll do that right now.